some of the statements that were made prior to Bharat became Resurgent. Famously, the defense minister said that we need fighter jets, but we have no money to buy them. We had Raghuram Rajan as Reserve Bank Governor, who said that all these practices of renewing loans without recovery should stop immediately, because that is actually weakening the entire banking system in this country. We have a history of loans growing at a breakneck speed between 2007 and 2013. And then we also have a background of banks having huge defaults between 2013, when Raghuram Rajan gave a mandate of not renewing loans which were in default, till 2017, when the banks were really in precarious position. Beyond that, because of various initiatives of the government, the economy is now growing. I won't say it's booming, but it definitely is growing. And for people like us who work in corporates, we experience it every passing year, and right now every day. Unfortunately, most of us who think about economy think that economy is the economic policy. But let me tell you that these are two different animals. Though they have some linkages, but economy per se is, though significant, only a part of economic policy. Economic policy encompasses much more than economy. And therefore, when we say Resurgent Bharat's economic policy perception, we are not really talking about just the economy, but we are probably looking at economic policy of the country. It was broadly stated that economic policy of the country is left of center, so socialistic, benevolent, not a capitalist policy. For many years we believed that, and for many years our budgets reflected that. As a result of that policy, we all know that we suffered setbacks between 1987 till almost 1994, and then the economic policy changed. And that change in economic policy brought about some relief. But the momentum was lost again midway. It had to be actually revived post 2014. Not that this government is doing everything right, but it definitely is driving a few things right. And it is pursuing a policy which I would say is holistic. It's not focused only on one aspect of development, it is actually focused on many aspects of development. And that was an uprising, the first freedom struggle. And the Britishers realized that unless we change something drastically, we won't be able to control this country and then take away most of its resources to UK. So what they changed in 1873 was our education. They banned Indian education and they forced their way of education, which existed then in their country. And that one single change changed the way we were generating wealth. Within 120 years, we became world's poorest country. By 1947, when Britishers left, we were not even contributing 3% of world's GDP, and we were a poor country. So the first important point that any economic policy has to address is education. If your economic policy doesn't address education, the economy cannot sustain. It cannot really generate the kind of wealth that is required to sustain such a large population. So if your economic policy is focused on economic activity and doesn't include education, then that's no economic policy. It's only a partial policy, not a holistic policy. We had so much wealth in 1100 or even 7th century that people came all the way from places to loot us. And initially we resisted, but later on we did, and we fell prey to their aggression and ultimately lost our ability to generate wealth. So what was lacking? We had no single economic policy which included defense. To protect the wealth that you generate, you need defense. And if your economic policy doesn't address defense, then it's not holistic. The policy has to address defense, then only it becomes holistic. Otherwise, it doesn't become holistic. But since economy is seen as one of the major drivers of economic policy, or success of economic policy is measured through success of economy, let's talk about economy. So what did change after 2014 and why did Bharat become a resurgent fire? The first change was introduced by Raghuram Rajan in 2013. So no more renewal of defaulting loans. No more evergreening of loans. And that started telling, by the time this government came in power, that started telling on banks' balance sheet. Provisioning increased, profits went down, in fact losses increased. And the banks' balance sheets started becoming weaker and weaker till 2017, when most of the loans were provided. But in 2017, 16-17, the government realized that unless we reform laws that monitor banking, we are not really going to recover what is there. If routine course of legal actions through DRTs and other laws that were Surface Act and DRT are not enough, then recoveries can be prolonged for decades and the banks will not be able to realize their money. So the first change that government made was a law called IBC, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. That was the first law introduced. The first time it didn't work very well, but the government kept on modifying it, kept on amending it, and they created a whole structure of NCLTs. So all these now are a parallel judicial system to address the problems of banks and corporates. You don't have to go to a court now. Earlier on, any demerger, any bankruptcy had to go to court. The routine court which handles everything, criminal law, civil suits, everything. The company law tribunals do not address civil suits, they do not address criminal act cases. They are focused on restructuring of corporates and insolvency cases and recovery of money. So what the government did through law was to separate the routine judicial matters from the commercial matters that addressed reforms in corporate world. So as a result, the government helped the banks in addressing the issue of recovery of loans. The initial impact was terrible. The initial impact was terrible because the law was not perfect. They had to do a lot of amendments. But unfortunately, finally, the NCLT judgments could still be challenged in the routine court. And therefore, now we are realizing that NCLT may not be the final solution unless it is completely insulated from the routine judiciary. But it did help strengthening of banks. It did help strengthening of banks. It did help banks not to lend money to people who were already addressed. CIBIL scores became mandatory. Evaluation and blacklisting of directors became a normal practice, and therefore nobody could default in one area, one loan, and borrow from other bank. Digitalization of most of the information made it possible for banks to realize that as somebody defaulted in Kashmir and asking for a loan in Maharashtra, earlier on it was not possible. So all this digitalization of transactions in bank was part of economic policy. Unless the government imagined, had it only been economic policy for addressing economy, probably we would not see digitalization. Probably we would not see linkage of Aadhaar cards and mobile numbers with your bank accounts. Because it was all encompassing, the government made sure that the banks, financial institutions, the tax authorities were able to actually identify people whether they are good or they are not good. It was part of economic policy, not part of any other digital policy or other policies that came. Then government also addressed the issue of other laws that were actually monitoring the company law. Those who work in the corporate world know how company law has been modified, how the new company law addresses monitoring of corporates, how the new requirements of taxation laws require you to make declarations which otherwise were not mandated. So a lot of information that was hidden somewhere inside the reports of auditors and the declaration directors' reports has now become very open, and the government is privy to getting all this information because it is now mandated. A simple law which mandates MSMEs to be paid in 45 days was not really effective. The law was there, but it wasn't effective. The day they made it mandatory for auditors to start putting it in their reports whether MSME is being paid in 45 days, and if the payment is delayed, whether interest is provided for and what interest is being provided for. Now it has become mandatory for auditors to mention it, and it has become mandatory for companies to pay interest. Corporates have been finding ways out of not paying the interest by probably paying it and taking it back in terms of discounts, etc. But the government is tight. The government is now making sure that if you have provided, you must pay. You should wait for the supplier to ask for any interest. Because no supplier is ever going to ask OEM to pay any interest, because ultimately OEM is a customer. A large unit is a customer. So nobody. But now the government says that no, if you have made a provision, you must pay. And the auditors insist that if you have made a provision, why didn't you pay? Why is it still showing that it is still not paid? So, strengthening of the MSME sector, which it has come through law, it has come through economic policy, which the government is pursuing. So on one hand, they are strengthening the industry. On the other hand, they are strengthening the NBFCs, the banking sector, the cooperative banks. I remember I was chairman of a bank in 1994-95 when government started insisting on norms that were normally made for large banks. Not many private banks were there, but large banks, scheduled banks. So the cooperative sector started crying. They said, but we are small, how can we have these kind of norms? How can we make provisioning like this? How can we start identifying accounts that are in default and start making provisions? But let me tell you, from 95 till 2007-8, the cooperative sector kept on crying. But those banks which really started following the government mandate started becoming healthier, and from 2014 onwards, the government also is charging now income tax. Of course, the law came much earlier, but this government has started recovering income tax from cooperative banks. Now, when the tax laws start tightening, the banks have to really make sure that their acts are absolutely clean. And that helps the sector to strengthen. So the cooperative sector, you see many failures. In cooperative sector we see failures. But most of the failures now are in cooperative credit society, which is not governed by a Reserve Bank, which is not governed by the banking laws. Failures are in cooperative credit society. Unfortunately, the media reports it as bank. They are not banks. They are actually monitored by the state cooperative department, not monitored by Reserve Bank of India. So by having a holistic policy which addressed not only the major banks, but which addressed even the cooperative banks which were lending to individuals and smaller businesses, the government has made sure that the institutional support to economy is now very strong. They are very healthy. That's what has changed in the last 10 years. Having spoken about institutions, knowing the time limit that I have, I need to move on. See, agriculture is a large part of economy. Contributes about 16-17% to economy, but supports almost 40-45% of the population. So what did the government do for agriculture? How did the government address agriculture's issue? See, it was nice of the government to say that we want to double the farmers' income. But how would the government do that? There were many decisions made, many policies implemented which were actually part of the economic policy. The economic policy was doubling the income of agriculture sector. That was the economic policy. But decisions were made in some other sectors. So agriculture policy was modified, fertilizer policy was modified. There were some changes that were mandated, and these changes actually helped the farmers, but the major change came through government procurement. Earlier on, the governments were procuring goods, and I remember a famous statement again made by government in Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court asked that you have large storage of food grains that are actually rotting in your storages. There is not enough place. Why don't you distribute it to the poor people of this country? Why are there deaths because of malnutrition? When you have excess, why don't you distribute it? And the government said that that is not the policy. We cannot do it. What has this government done? If you remember what they did in Corona, when large population lost their earnings, they took a decision that we have increased the procurement. In fact, the procurement from farmers has increased multifold in last 10 years. Even in initial first 2-3 years, it tripled or went quadrupled. But this food grain, there was a problem in storage. So the government decided to distribute it to all the families who had lost their jobs. 80 crore people getting food grains every day. We feel that the government is distributing it free. But remember, see, in last 4 years, how many of us have read about death due to malnutrition? Death due to hunger. At least I am an avid reader of newspapers every day. And there is now social media which reaches you whether you want to or you don't want to see. How many news or how many such reels do you see, or how many bloggers talk about hunger, death due to hunger or malnutrition? So on one hand, the government has addressed malnutrition. On the other hand, government is putting money in hands of farmers. Now I am not saying that all the money that government spends, about 2,30,000 or 2,40,000 crores, goes into hands of farmers. We have smart people, smart traders who probably would procure from farmers and sell it to government. And when the government tries to stop that, you have farmers' agitation blocking roads. So I am not saying that the system is perfect, but at the same time, the policy is perfect. Procure from the farmers at a higher price and don't let it lie in godowns for years to be sold to alcohol makers later on at a reduced rate. That is precisely what was happening to all the food grain that was lying in government godowns. The government had to come out with this policy of allowing making alcohol out of food grain. The whole policy came because of that, and people benefited from that. But now the government says that if I procure so much, I distribute so much. So nothing stays there. So first come, first out. Food security is what was being talked when we were procuring food grains. Was there a security? How can you feed rotten food grain to your population? Now the food security is really achieved because this is economic policy. Support the agriculture, feed the poor, and ensure that you have food security. 3 targets achieved through this all-encompassing policy. When Make in India was announced, nobody believed. We had a Swadeshi movement. What is different in Making India? So you are actually resurrecting something that was already given a go by in 1994 when liberalization came. So why in 2014 you resurrect or 2015 you resurrect Make in India? But this was Making India for the world. And nobody believed it. Nobody believed it. I remember a famous statement of a politician in 2019 election. Make in India to hoga hi nahi. I don't need to quote the person's name, but most of you know who said this. Ye Make in India to hoga hi nahi. What has happened because of Make in India? You sit in a place which is a large manufacturer of automobiles. Look at the exports that are happening. Not only two-wheelers, not only three-wheelers, cars. If you see the figures of cars being exported, and if you travel a lot, When you see a Tata or a Mahindra car in some other foreign country, and not only developing countries in Africa, when you see it in Europe, you feel so proud that now we are really making in India for the world. Make in India was not an industrial policy, it was an economic policy. It wasn't a policy for industry, it was a policy for economic policy. So, if you look at how we handled Corona, how our finance ministry handled Corona, it's something unique. I mean, you and me, most of us who are in corporate world are beneficiaries of that policy. See, most of the Western world made sure that grants were given to people for spending. So money in the hands of consumers. Money in the hands of consumers. So that the market economy grows and the economy stays stable during Corona. That is what every single economist in Western world advised and every government in Western world did. Grants for car purchases, grants for spending, money into your bank accounts. We also did that. Where did we put money? Not to every Tom, Dick and Harry, not to everywhere. We put 500 rupees into accounts of the most marginalized women who really needed that 500 rupees to be spent immediately. If the money came into my account, why would I spend that 500 rupees? How would it help economy? I don't need that money, I won't spend it. But a marginalized woman would definitely spend it. So we saw queues for withdrawing that money every month. So money most effectively used, money in hands of customers, but where the money will definitely be spent on essentials, not on luxuries. If I get the money, I may go and buy a luxury watch. But the marginalized section of the society is going to buy essentials. So money in hands of essentials. We helped the industry, but we did not give them grants. We gave them loans, guaranteed by the government. The scheme was called ECLGS, if I am right. It was called ECLGS. 20% of your working capital as on 31st March, when Corona lockdowns were declared, was given. It was for asking, but only to those accounts who were regular, who had paid all their installments and interest as on 31st March. So very smart. The banking sector helped everyone who needed money, and the industry took that money only when the industry started working after the lockdown period. What's the situation today? Most of that money has been repaid. So now to overcome the Iran war impact, government has announced a similar scheme again. We gave money. Now, this was for performing assets. But there are others who are non-performing, may have missed one or two installments, may have missed one payment of interest. You can't really let them down. So the government announced another scheme giving 50,000 rupees to the promoters, or say 50,000 crore rupees were provided to be given to promoters as personal loan to be put into industry so that the industry becomes a standard account and it can use it. But the repayment responsibility was that of the person. 10,000 rupees to street vendors. Every section of economic activity was addressed in some way or the other without giving grants, expecting the money to come back, but giving cushion to the bank that if the money doesn't come back, the government would make it good. Wasn't the government making it good even in the earlier years when the corporates were defaulting and banks were losing money? Recapitalization of banks was a normal practice for 2-3 decades in this country. to strengthen the banks. So government managed that in such a good way that when every other country faced inflation because of huge money flowing into market in hands of customers, we made sure that the wheel of production kept on running because of the money provided, and that money came back. So our inflation was absolutely under control post-corona, whereas inflation including US, all the European countries, it was way beyond what they are used to. It was way beyond what they are used to. So this is economic policy. No free lunch. We will give you support. We will support you, but no free lunch. Now that's what is economic policy. And the last point that I would like to make, because I am sure I have already run out of time, is regarding defense. You see, the Make in India was not only for cars. If you look at our defense production, for ages the government was providing money to various research organizations, research labs set up by government for coming out with a light combat aircraft, for a light battle tank, for various missiles. Nothing was coming out. Till 2014, there was nothing that these labs could show except small successes here and there. Post 2014, Operation Sindoor was a classic demonstration of what has changed in Indian defense sector. The kind of missiles now we are exporting. I mean, we were a net importer. The kind of frigates that we have produced in last 1 year, the number of ships that have become seaworthy, warships that have become seaworthy in last one and a half year, we couldn't achieve that in 20 years in the past. That's Make in India. That's Make in India. We were importing drones. We were importing the Bofors gun. Now Bharat Forge produces guns which are as good or better. As good or better. So that had changed. So the economic policy didn't address only one sector. The new education policy, national education policy. There is a complete emphasis on resurrecting the Indian education system. Doesn't mean that yajna karo, wo aisa karo. No. They are saying that the system help people learn, students learn through experiments. They were working in gurukuls, learning the skills to maintain the kitchen, learning the skills to capture the firewood, get the food, till the farms, and also studying the subjects. So, learning through actual experience. Entire emphasis of National Education Policy 2020 is on actually experiential learning. So they are trying to take us back to where every person will become self-sufficient. If he doesn't get a job, he would have enough skills to earn his living. Today, unfortunately, people who have degrees do not have any skill to use if they have really the knowledge of subject in which they have graduated. They do not have skills. But a time will come when people, students coming out of all these institutions, if it is really implemented, because we are very poor at implementation. So if it is really implemented, we will have this shortage of manpower, shortage of skilled manpower would be a thing of past in another 10 or 15 years, when people who start today at the lowest level of education, primary or secondary education, those students, if the policy really works, would be really good hands to hire in another 15-20 years. And we can then start really generating wealth, because the manpower would have required skills to generate that. So the economic policy, last but not the least, the infrastructure. So the economic policy has also addressed the infrastructure, not only for transportation, railways. Look at the transformation of railways. Railway was an independent budget. Why? Because the Britishers had private railway. Railway became government railway, but the budget continued to be a separate budget for railways. It was merged with the regular budget, and now therefore the railways have enough money to spend on capex. So you see that most of the railway tracks are now electrified. All the middle gauge railways will become thing of past, or probably already have become thing of past. Doubling of rail tracks has become actually something that you can see happening. Otherwise, it used to be only a demand, a political demand that continued for years together. Every budget, 20 days before the budget, people would come on street, हमारा railway line meter gauge का broad gauge करो, हमारा railway line doubling of line करो. Now it's actually happening. There is a huge investment. The railway rates have become really very good. All those who have travelled in Vande Bharat would vouch for the quality of the roads. But I am not talking of roads in our lands, the hinterlands of Himalayas. I have crisscrossed Himalayas starting from border of Pakistan to border of Bangladesh in Meghalaya. And the kind of roads that you see in Himalayas going right up to border of China was something that was not there when I used to trek Himalayas in 2002 and 2003. I mean, I was shocked to see a road going from beyond Manali, Jispa. From Jispa we started walking in the wilderness where you could hardly meet a person, and we went up to Sarchu, crossing about 120 kilometers, crossing passes of 16,000, 18,000 feet. This was in 2002. No road, no development, no human beings, just one village we crossed. Today there is a motorable road exactly on the track which we went. It goes through Shinkula, 16,000 feet, 16,300 feet pass, and it goes right up to Padum beyond Leh. So roads, I mean, you can move your equipment right up to China border within days. Galwan, I was very pleased to see a road going from Nubra Valley to Pangong, which goes very close to Nubra Valley. You can actually drive. So it's not only commerce or communication or transport that is being helped through roads, it is the defense that is also being strengthened through roads. So my dear friends, as an entrepreneur, I see this policy which actually goes far beyond just the economy. It encompasses defense, it encompasses education, it encompasses research and development. I mean, I can go on telling you what it encompasses: agriculture, and I can quote many other things. I can speak for 2 hours on this subject, but I am sure you would appreciate that the policy of Resurgent Bharat, economic policy of Resurgent Bharat, is holistic. It's not just focused on one area, and it definitely is not focused on capitalism. Because if Adani has increased his turnover, so has Mr. Ramchandra. And I am sure people sitting in this audience would also say that, okay, yes, we have also grown in past so many years. So I see a hope in the new economic policy of the new Resurgent Bharat, and I am sure you would also start thinking in these lines and agree with me, if not today, in maybe a couple of months. Thank you.